help me open with the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thank you. Welcome to 2218's Saturday night speaker meeting. This is an open meeting and all are welcome. We feature members of recovery to share their experience, strength, and hope. On the second Saturday of the even months, we also feature an Al-Anon speaker. For 78 years, 2218 has been a self-supporting home to recovery. Our main source of income is our membership. We encourage you to become a pledging member. Please feel free to see me after the meeting to learn more about the opportunities. The second way 2218 is self-supported through our own contributions. We will pass the basket now. Donations go to help keep the lights on, heating and air conditioning, water, sewer, and maintaining the building, originally built in 1887. Anthony, do you mind? Thank you. As we pass the basket, please make sure to silence all phones and electronic devices. Money collected in the basket is returned to the stage after the meeting, and I'll count that. We drop it and keep it secure in a safe. We don't have any announcements of upcoming club activities and events right now because of the government restrictions that we're under. We are thankful to the government that we've been allowed to stay open every day through this COVID pandemic to help the people who suffer from addictions. I've asked Katie to read the preamble. Thank you, Katie.
You bet. I'm Katie. I'm an alcoholic addict.
Hi, Katie.
Hi, Katie.
Hi. This is the preamble. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues, fees. For AA membership, we are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. Does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes or primary purpose. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Katie. Thanks for being here tonight. And I have asked Amy to read how it works. Thank you, Amy.
Hello, I'm Amy and I'm in recovery.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, Amy.
How it works. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those, too, who suffer more grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. If you have decided that you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. At some of these we balked. We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, and powerful. Without help, it is too much for us. But there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked God his protection, we asked his protection and care with complete abandon. Here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all of these defects of character. 7, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Many of us exclaimed, "What in order? I can't go through with it." Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints, but the point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. And C, that God could and would if he were sought.
Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you for being here tonight. I would like to welcome our speaker, Anthony M. Everybody, please.
Everything there? Okay.
Thank you very much, Anthony.
Thank you for inviting me,
Thanks for
Tim.
being here tonight.
You're welcome. Tim knows me. We attend Friday Night Squad 15 together. My name is Anthony M., and I'm happy to be here. It's an honor to be here. I've been at this podium before. I've spoken into this microphone before, but I've never done an entire speaker meeting. So having a feel for the amount of material that I need to cover the time, let's hope that I got it. I think that I do. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy 2020 is over. It was a very difficult year for me. I imagine it was for many of you too. So welcome to 2021. And, this room is a sacred place to me. I am working on my 34th year of sobriety. Thank you, everyone. But this hallway, the other side of that room on Sunday mornings back in 1986, I started over in that room. That was my first exposure to AAA. And so that was Squad 61, Sunday, 10 a.m. And they're still meeting. And right now, again, my usual regular meeting is Friday night, Squad 15 here, but with the COVID and the quarantining and stuff, we all know how topsy-turvy everything is. But this club, I guess, for me is where it all began, and for that reason, this entire house, this entire home is a sacred place to me. And one of the things I used to look at is the banner up behind me, the one that reads, "But for the grace of God." And, I read that, and when I listen to "but for the grace of God," I think of it usually being followed with "there go I." And I think that the term is schadenfreude when you take comfort in seeing someone else's misfortune. And I think for a long time I read it like that, "but for the grace of God, there go I," or in slang or vulgar way of thinking it would be, well, at least I'm not that poor bastard over there. But, I don't take comfort in it that way. What it means to me now over time is that but for the grace of God, there go I, because that poor bastard over there really, in a sense, was me. What I plan to talk about tonight is actually God. And I promise you, I'm not here to proselytize. I'm not here to convince you to think of God in anything other than the way that you understand him. A few years ago, I actually joined a Unitarian church, and the Unitarians have a joke that they say, "What do you get when you cross a Unitarian with a Jehovah's Witness?" And the punchline to the joke is you get somebody that knocks on your door for no apparent reason. I hope that that's me tonight. I'm knocking on your door, but it's only to get you to think about God, and not because I want you to think about God in a certain way. I'm going to share my experience, my strength, and my hope with you. That's what we do. I'm going to try and explain what I used to be like, what happened, and what I'm like now, but I'm going to do that in two different epochs in my life. The reason that I want to do that is actually straight out of the Big Book from page 18. There is a solution. It says, "But the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who is properly armed with facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished." Now, as I talk about myself, like I said, I want to talk about God, but because of this reason, I feel like I need to share some pieces of my life with you. I guess that's partly to get kind of a credibility with you. But I think that just for the sake of trying to be, it's going to be brief. It may feel like I'm glossing it over, but please understand I've got to compress 34 years into a series of maybe 10 to 15 minutes. So hang on, here we go. My first drinks were probably around age 14. They happened in the basement of my home. My grandfather had a bar. I would sneak in, get the Bacardi rum, mix it up with some Coke in whatever proportions I happen to think look right for a 14-year-old. And the first couple times, not much happened. Later on, I started to get the effect. I started to get the warmth. I started to get the feelings that went on. By age 16, I was drinking beer with my friends. Now we had the slap happy stuff. We were laughing, doing stupid things, and it was actually drinking was fun. Well, if drinking was fun, then marijuana was probably fun too. And so we started up with that. They talk about gateway drugs, and eventually I was fooling around with mushrooms and hashish and speed. Emotionally, I guess I felt that, as far as watching the films that they show you in high school and things, that I'm too smart for this kind of stuff. And yet at the same time, there was a certain feeling that I was woefully inadequate, that I wasn't good enough for anything. I felt like I was smart, but I still wasn't good enough. And I guess here's the key: I began to lose control of the ability to choose when I was going to use. You know, this sense of being unique, of special, that other people didn't understand me. You know, I even recall I had a bad trip on mushrooms once. I was walking through South Minneapolis. I was on Lyndale, and I don't know what it was, maybe around 44th or something. There was a church there, and it was like 1 a.m., and it was dark, and I was well under the influence. And I thought, you know what, I really need to go to God. God can help me. And I'm sure that what happened here is really just coincidence. It's probably that, you know, the lights of the church were on a timer, but I was trying to get up to the church doors and say, I need to talk to you, God. And right as I got up to the doors, every light in the church suddenly extinguished. Again, it's probably circumstance or coincidence. And, you know, I guess if this was a creative writing class, maybe we'd call it foreshadowing. There was humiliating behavior at parties. There was me, Anthony, passed out underneath the Christmas tree on New Year's Eve. There was me making inappropriate comments to the ladies at parties. Eventually it got to be that the dissonance of this got to be so bad, out of emotional breakdowns, more than teenage angst. I would feel that life was no longer worth living. I ended up going away to college. Went out to Berklee College of Music in Boston, but I was still using drugs and I didn't perform well there. I returned home with my tail between my legs. I ended up still enrolling in some local community colleges, still interested in musical classes. But eventually it got to the point where I realized that I couldn't control this anymore and that I needed help. On page 24 of the Big Book chapter, there is a solution. It reads, "The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable, at certain times, to bring into our consciousness, with sufficient force, the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink." On page 39, more about alcoholism, it says, "But the actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge." If I were to describe my thoughts on God during this period, I would say they varied between agnosticism and atheism. I think it perhaps depended on how well things were going my way. At times I hated my life and thought that no God was possible. Towards the end, I would take actions to kind of white knuckle it, to say that I can control this. You know, I would say, I'm going to go 2 or 3 days and I'm not going to take a drink and I'm not going to take a drug. I'd do it. I could actually white knuckle and hang on, but as it got to be that, say, 3rd day that I was holding off on, I'd be counting down the hours until my arbitrary deadline was coming so I could go out and I could drink or I could use again. Strangely, in light of that, my last drink was actually on April 26, 1986. That's the same day the Chernobyl nuclear accident happened. I like to joke that on the day that Chernobyl melted down, so did I. But you know, really, truthfully, to be candid with you, I didn't know that was my last drink when I took it. It wasn't that I was in bad shape that particular night, but it was the following day that I decided I've got to get into treatment. I entered outpatient treatment at Mounds Park Hospital in St. Paul. It's not there anymore. It's over by the Indian Mounds Park, but I can't remember if they converted it into condos or what it is now. I entered that treatment thinking, okay, here's a place I can go where they're going to teach me how to drink properly. I had seen people that I knew had drinking problems, and you know, they'd go to treatment and they'd come out, and a lot of times I'd see them drinking again, but I thought, well, they must have fixed them. You know, I didn't know going in that the answer was going to be that sobriety needs to be a lifelong abstinence. I assume it's still the same, I don't know. But treatment plan was just to get you through step 5. If you want to graduate from treatment, you got to get through the 5th step. While I was there, the counselors realized there was additional issues that needed resolution between, family issues and things. It's beyond the scope of what I can go into tonight, but that was part of the problem as well. I guess the main thing is, at this point, I come in thinking, look, make it just so I can drink normally again and just make all the chatter in my head stop and make me get control of my life, because everything seems to be out of control. And no matter what I try to touch, seems to get screwed up, and I can't get people to do what I want them to do. Fix that, and I should be okay drinking again. But that's not how it works. So I'm there, I guess, and we all start as rookies in AA. Nobody comes in here because things are still going okay, and nobody comes in there because they know what they're doing. But I think the magic thing about treatment for me, was very similar to what in Bill W.'s story in the Big Book says. He says kind of a turning point for him was when he said, why don't you choose your own conception of God? I didn't know you could do that. And the thing was, as I began to open my mind to that, we do step 2, which is came to believe, which to me is a step of possibility that you can take the second step in saying, well, if there is a God or if there is a higher power, then he could restore me to sanity. I think that's all the open-mindedness you need to successfully work the second step. But I did the 3rd step in earnest because I still felt crappy. And I still felt like, this is not any fun. And when I did the 3rd step in earnest, I got almost immediate results. In the matter of maybe 48 hours, my life and what I perceived it to be got turned over. I kind of got the rug pulled out from underneath me. In a matter of 48 to whatever hours it was, I grew up thinking my father was dead, and I learned that that was not the case. That was a pretty big upset for me to have my world change. But learning that, I began to understand, here are the things, this is something that explains a lot of the things that are going on with the way people are behaving around me, my mom, my family. And I understood it. And at that point, things began to heal. And all it took was letting go of my own self-will and saying, God, you take care of it. On page 25 in the Big Book, it says, the great fact is just this and nothing else, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences. What I just described was really my first spiritual experience. I guess the only other one I would think is noteworthy that I'd want to share didn't happen to me until maybe about 9 months sober. And I had gone out, I think it was to Afton Alps with some friends, and we were skiing. And I think it was January. I think it was cold like it is now. And I was going up the ski lift by myself, and the sun was setting. I was alone. And the ski lift stopped because probably somebody fell. And I was just swaying, looking at the sunset. And all of a sudden I got this sense of warmth and serenity that I had never felt before. And I think at that moment I felt like, you know what, you're going to be okay. After exiting treatment, like I say, I discovered 2218, and I look back in this room and I can still kind of see the ghosts of the people that I used to talk with. I used to be Squad 61's angry young man, and I'll trust that the guys in 15 who are probably listening now would say, but we don't let you talk of yourself as a young any man anymore. Like I say, I did treatment. I made the best 4th and 5th step I could at the time. I made, at that time, it was kind of like a ledger. It's like, well, here's the bad things about me, and over here are the good things about me, assets and liabilities. If you've ever attended the class down here, the 4-step workshop, which to me it's a very effective way of going through the Big Book and learning there's a better way to do the 4th step. is to go and really dig and root at where are the places are you being selfish, because that is really the root of all this. Self-will run riot. That's where your anger, your resentments, your fears, they're all rooted in either it's a fear of losing something you want or not getting something that you want. And understanding your self-will is a big part of doing a good fourth step, at least in my opinion. I had a sponsor named Danny. Danny used to refer to himself as my black dad. He always would call not alcoholic, but he'd say, "I'm Danny Wino." He's an interesting guy. His drinking career took him through Oklahoma and the southwestern United States. He told me he taught himself some Spanish, was able to get along speaking Spanish. And he too, I think he was up around the time he was sponsoring me, he was in 20 plus years of sobriety. This is going to be very much what I'm telling you here is a do as I say, not as I do. Also, shortly after sobering up, I got a job at the liquor store right over here on Nickwood Avenue. Probably not wise advice to say, well, go work in a liquor store after you got a year or two of sobriety. But I did do that. Strangely, I would tell you that my experience there actually strengthened my sobriety. This was a rougher neighborhood than it is now back then. And some nights I'd have to be the delivery driver and I'd be running around this neighborhood, have a couple $100 cash on me and a car full of liquor. It's also known as being a moving target. Had a gun put in my face just a few blocks up. So interesting, but the thing is you'd get this cameo appearance when you're making deliveries. A door would open and you could look into the life of somebody that had a problem with alcohol but chose not to stop drinking. And you'd see what their lives turned out to be, and you'd say, I don't want any part of that. So I sobered up. What was I like afterwards? There was the pink cloud of treatment. Everybody comes out of treatment, they're happy, they're positive. And I think that's a good thing. I joined a band. One of the bandmates that I was playing with was a flight instructor, so I got interested in aviation. I bought myself a motorcycle. I took a trip out to Boston on it. I learned a lot about patience. I learned a lot about rigorous honesty. When you go to become a pilot, you have to get a medical certificate, and one of the questions on the medical application is, have you ever been treated for alcoholism? And I thought, well, rigorous honesty, yeah, I'll just say yes, and they'll be impressed with my honesty, and I'll fly right through. Doesn't work like that. It ended up taking me 2+ years to get my medical certificate, and I'd already rolled in an aviation program, and I was very frustrated, and a lot of people on the other side of the room in Squad 61 heard about that, but that's where I learned about patience. I learned to be a better boyfriend, or maybe at least better at being a boyfriend. I graduated from college. There was a hardship when my sponsor, Danny, passed away. He passed away approximately 6 weeks before I was to get married. I did get married. I bought a house. I was getting promotions at work. And at some point I realized I already had more than I dreamed was possible as a teenager. And with Danny gone, I don't know, it felt like maybe AA isn't the same anymore. And I thought, well, I don't really need to attend AA because I know the ropes. So I stopped attending meetings. Marriage was good for a while. I ended up being married for 18 years. I'd say probably 13 of that was good. During the marriage, we endured 3 miscarriages. Those were sad. But other than that, this stage of life, being sober, was pretty good, save for the occasional hardships of loss. I didn't attend church, and I neglected to attend AA. My spiritual growth had plateaued and was stagnant. I felt I was spiritual enough, and yet it sounds curiously like Bill W. writes about his own beliefs before his own spiritual experience. Bill writes, I had always believed in a power greater than myself. I had often pondered these things. I was not an atheist. Few people really are. For that means blind faith in the strange proposition that this universe originated in a cipher and aimlessly rushes nowhere. My intellectual heroes, the chemists, the astronomers, even the evolutionists, suggested vast laws and forces at work. Despite contrary indications, I had little doubt that a mighty purpose and rhythm underlay all. How could there be so much of precise and immutable law and no intelligence? I simply had to believe in a spirit of the universe who knew neither time nor limitation. But that was as far as I had gone. With ministers and the world's religions, I parted right there. When they talked of a God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength, and direction, I became irritated, and my mind snapped shut against such a theory. To Christ, I conceded the certainty of a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him. His moral teaching most excellent. For myself, I had adopted these parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. So I share this stuff that I accomplished, and it's not because I want to puff up my chest or impress you, but just ask yourself the question, how much of that would I achieved had I not stayed sober or become sober and stayed sober? How different might my story have been? However, the second epoch is my recovery from dry drunkenness. As I said, I stopped attending AA meetings. I became increasingly confident, thinking I can be self-reliant, that I can do this, I can drive the car. I ceased praying, I ceased meditating, and I had an increased sense of frustration that my life wasn't heading where I thought it should. Two of my childhood friends, namely ones that I used with, ended up dying. My best friend from third grade died in 2002. He committed suicide. I would be wrong to speculate. I know some of the details of what was going on in his life, but here's the thing that makes me so sad about that, is they found him in his garage with the car running, and he had opened the door, and I believe from the way he was found that he had figured or changed his mind, but he changed his mind too late. Another friend died in a motorcycle accident. I'd be speculating the details, but I know that he died in an accident 10 days after his mother had been diagnosed with cancer. And I began to see things through an I deserve something better lens. I started to have resentments towards my spouse. My personality became combative. And once again, I was the stage director in the big book. And I began to retreat into myself. And I think what happened is that I forgot what dry drunkenness was. If you're not aware, it's when you get, even though you keep the cork in the bottle or you don't pick up, you get your mind back into that state of how it was when you were drinking and what you were using. I got it into my head that I needed to save what was left of my life, and I filed for divorce. During the middle of that divorce, I walked off a job that I had been at for 13 years, my middle finger's up in the air. In addition to splitting everything in half in the divorce, I ended up getting saddled with an additional $50,000 of spousal maintenance. I had no immediate job prospects. I felt like quitting life. I'm not a very good advertisement for somebody that probably had 27 years of sobriety at that point. When a friend of mine heard that I had, call it, been terminated or quit my job, he knew something was up, and he came to see me. Came out and he said, "Let me buy you lunch." And during that conversation, the advice he gave to me was, get your spiritual house in order, and the rest will fall into place. So I returned to AA. I came down to this auditorium. It was right at that door. I walked in that door, ran into a friend that I hadn't seen here, I hadn't talked to for decades. Didn't even remember his name, even though him and I were actually pretty good friends when I was originally attending here. I went out to Gopher State. I ran into another friend out there. I spent maybe an hour or two, talking with him, telling him my sad story. Curiously, he was the guy that was the organist at my wedding. So what am I like now? You know, after coming back to AA, I probably sent out 100 resumes, got 2 interviews, got no job offers. But one day, the phone rang, and it was a recruiter, and he said, I had seen your resume online, and a job literally found me. I worked at this job. I'm still working there. I've been there over 7 years now. They've actually paid for some schooling for me. Some other things that I've done, I went skydiving. I even did it twice. I jumped out of a perfectly good airplane. I made friends in Squad 15. I trained for and completed a half marathon in Austin, Texas, and a full marathon in Knoxville, Tennessee. I started taking dance lessons. I traveled to Argentina, Brazil, Costa Rica, and Puerto Rico, started studying Spanish. I met a woman from Ecuador, and I fell in love. And again, I share this stuff not because I want you to be impressed with me, but rather because I want you to consider how much of that would I achieved if I did not get my spiritual house in order. How different might my life have been? If you were to ask me how I felt a year ago today, I would have told you that I felt like king of the world. I recall even thinking to myself that I should ask my squad members, the guys in 15, say, hey, keep an eye on me, lest I show signs of maybe taking hold of that wheel once again. Things were going really good. And then tragedy struck. In March of 2020, just as all this COVID was flaring up, my love was diagnosed with stage 4 stomach cancer. Due to COVID, her restaurant job put her on furlough. In an odd way, this helped, as her being unemployed due to COVID, it made her eligible for charitable care. She began chemotherapy and the discomforts that come with that. Her siblings and I did what we could for caregiving. The first round of chemo was ineffective, so she began a second type of chemo, but during that treatment she developed problems with fluid in her lungs. She was hospitalized at the end of May, and I couldn't visit her due to the restrictions from COVID. In June, she was having trouble keeping solid foods down. She couldn't eat. We were getting down to just juices and popsicles. And by the end of the month, she had to be readmitted to the hospital. It was then she decided she was ready to go back home to Ecuador. So I bought her a ring, and I bought a pair of tickets to Ecuador, one round trip, one way. And we made the arduous trip to Ecuador. It wasn't easy. The flights don't line up well, and it took over 24 hours for us to get from Minneapolis to her home. As soon as she got to her hometown, she was hospitalized. We didn't even get her home first. Out of the 15 days that she spent in Ecuador home, her first 4 were in the hospital. Second 4 were she got to come home. And then she had to be readmitted to a cancer hospital in a nearby city. She was in that hospital for 8 days. And on the 8th day from that hospitalization, she came home. And she was on the sofa, only home for a matter of hours. And she said, I need to go to the bathroom. So family and I went over to help her up. She took maybe a dozen steps, and then she collapsed, and then she died. So here I am. I'm still grieving her loss, and I'm struggling with some mighty questions. The biggest one is why? Why, God? I prayed for her family prayed for her. Her church group prayed for her. My fellow AA members prayed for her. My friends prayed for her, and she even prayed for herself. Why were these prayers not answered? If I go through some of the reasonable answers, none of them are appealing to me. It could be because I did not deserve it, or because I did not pray hard enough, or because God knows what's better for me better than I do, or because maybe somebody, God forbid, more worthy was praying for the opposite, or because praying is a sham and God does not listen to our prayers, or maybe there is no God. What was the point of discovering one another if our love was only to be cut short? Does God truly intervene in our lives? If so, why then was this not an instance where divine intervention was warranted? How could God expect me to have gratitude now? You with me still, Ivan? Sorry, the guys online are talking. Can you hear me now, Ivan? Yeah, that's what I heard. I'll keep going, hope they can find a way back. Pete, if you want to take a look and see if you can solve that. A friend suggested a book to me entitled When Bad Things Happen to Good People. It's by Rabbi Harold Kushner. He lost a son at age 14 due to a degenerative disease. And I found a little comfort in the following passage where he's actually quoting another author, Dorothy Sewell, from her book Suffering. It reads, "We are familiar with the idea that various religions honor the memories of martyrs for God, people who died in such a way as to bear witness to their faith. By remembering their faith in the face of death, our own faith is strengthened. Such people are God's martyrs. But the forces of despair and disbelief have their martyrs too, people whose death weakens other people's faith in God and in His world. If the death of an elderly woman in Auschwitz or of a child in a hospital ward leaves us doubting God and less able to affirm the world's goodness, then that woman and that child become the devil's martyrs, witnesses against God, against the meaningfulness of a moral life, rather than witnesses in favor. But, and this is Sewell's most important point, it is not the circumstances of their death that makes them witnesses for or against God. It is our reaction to their death. The fact of life and death are neutral. We, by our responses, give suffering either a positive or negative meaning. Illness, accidents, human tragedies kill people, but they do not necessarily kill life or faith. If the death and suffering of someone we love makes us bitter, jealous, against all religion, and incapable of happiness, we turn the person who died into one of the devil's martyrs. If suffering and death to someone close to us bring us to explore the limits of our capacity for strength and love and cheerfulness, if it leads us to discover sources of consolation we never knew before, then we make the person into a witness for the affirmation of life rather than its rejection. My love, Rosanna, was a devout Catholic. As her cancer progressed, she continued to profess her faith, remained active in her prayer group, and prayed often. She maintained an attitude of grace that was several levels higher than I could ever hope to attain. How do I strengthen my own faith in this adversity and let her be one of God's rather than the devil's martyrs? How might I renew myself through a new spiritual experience? In other words, how do I pick up the pieces of the faith that I had before and rebuild it into something that makes sense to me? I go back to the big book and I read from the Appendix 2, Spiritual Experience. We find that no one need have difficulty with the spirituality of the program. Willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness are the essentials of recovery. But these are indispensable. On page 28, there is a solution. The distinguished American psychologist William James, in his book Varieties of Religious Experience, indicates a multitude of ways which men have discovered God. We have no desire to convince anyone that there is only one way by faith which is acquired. Most of our experiences are what the psychologist William James calls the educational variety, because they develop slowly over a period of time. I have read the Varieties of Religious Experience. It's freely available online if you care to look for it. Interesting to me from the historical place in AA, but the stories didn't quite resonate with me. I mention them because it supports the idea that there is more than one path to spirituality, and I have no desire to insist that anyone here believe something specific, but rather that you be willing, honest, and open-minded in your exploration of your answer to the question of God as you understand Him. If you are new to sobriety and just starting your spiritual journey, you need some place to start. Or if you are like me, finding your spirituality needs revisiting and you need to start over. To be candid with you, this year has made me feel spiritually like a newcomer. The Big Book explains. Many times we talk to a new man and watch his hope rise as we discuss his alcoholic problems and we explain our fellowship. But his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God, for we have reopened a subject which our man thought he had neatly evaded or entirely ignored. We know how he feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice. Some of us have been violently anti-religious. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him with which someone had tried to impress during childhood. Perhaps we rejected this particular conception because it seemed inadequate. With that rejection, we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. We were bothered with the thought that faith and a dependence upon a power beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. We looked upon this world of warring individuals, warring theological systems, and inexplicable calamity with deep skepticism. We looked askance at many individuals who claimed to be godly. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it all? And who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow? Yet in other moments we found ourselves thinking, when enchanted by a starlit night, who then made all this? There was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost. It's from page 45, We Agnostics. I have an admiration for science, especially physics, astronomy, cosmology. Science strives to uncover the truth about the empirical world we live in. It does so without the threat of internal damnation for believing in something contrary to its teachings. But you may have to endure some ridicule if you choose to believe in something untenable. The earth is not flat. Some atheists offer criticism against the idea of God by noting that as science makes progressive discoveries, that people who believe in God will retreat to the next unexplained phenomena as evidence for the existence of God. This is known as the God of the gaps. An example of this might be the Big Bang. It is perfectly reasonable to look at the evidence astronomy gives us about an expanding universe and infer that it must have been previously smaller. But at what point is it explained that something came from nothing? It seems to me that even with science, one must take a few things on faith. Also, it is not clear to me where science can provide comfort and care when we feel overwhelmed, when we have endured a crippling loss, or we simply need help. To quote again from the Big Book, this time Dr. Silkworth, we doctors have realized for a long time that some form of moral psychology was of an urgent importance to alcoholics. But its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. What with our ultra-modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. Albert Einstein once said, "I believe in the God of Spinoza." As I am also fond of philosophy, this led me to look more deeply into the work of Baruch, or also known as Benedict de Spinoza. Spinoza wrote a book titled Ethics, and while the philosophical branch of ethics is normally to answer the questions of how we ought behave, this book attempts to provide a proof in the fashion of geometry, like we did in high school, for the existence of God, though a God different than we find prevalent in religions. It is a 200 and some page long book, and I would be remiss if I told you that I understood it perfectly. I do not. It is one of the most difficult to understand books I've ever read. It has influenced my own personal understanding of God, despite my disagreement with a few things contained within. Another argument which holds sway with me is the watchmaker argument of William Paley. If you're not familiar with it, Paley comes up with the idea that if we came upon some stones and then a watch on the ground, we'd be okay with the idea that thinking that stones had always been there. But if we looked at the watch and the watch face and we saw the parts and saw that It's apparent that there's a design and there's a purpose for it. I guess you could really say Paley's putting forth argument for design. But again, it's not proof of the existence of God. But I do like to think Paley's got a point there. Like I say, I joined, I'm not going to make it if I go through all that. I joined a Unitarian church a couple years ago. And, Unitarians are a little bit different, and it's a creedless church. But they had me do an exercise, and I'm going to edit this a little bit, but there's 2 questions, I guess, that they asked me out of 5 that I'll share with you, which are part of how I understand God. And I guess the reason I want to share this is because I wrote this in 2016, actually before I met Rosanna. And there are 2 questions. One of them is, what is the purpose of a beloved community? And then the other one is, how do we live in the face of loss? And where is God in suffering? My responses to that, when I say, what is the purpose of beloved community? I was thinking of AA when I answered it. I said, a beloved community is a source of strength for its members. It achieves this by easing our burdens, by reminding us that we are not facing our problems alone. It reminds us that we are not the only ones to have to face a particular problem. If we are overwhelmed, the encouragements of others that we know and trust is often enough to take those additional steps we need to take, but somehow cannot muster ourselves to do so. During times of confidence, we are often blessed with the opportunity to help another person, and in doing so, we are also relieved of the burden of ourselves. Taking the focus away from things we think we lack, we are instead focused on helping someone else improve their condition. If we see a positive change for that person, we are rewarded with a feeling of purpose and the warm serenity that comes from that. And how do we live with the face of loss? Where is God in suffering? Our options are limited sometimes. Pain can be your friend when it is teaching you to correct a behavior, such as learning not to touch a hot stove, nor continue banging your head against a brick wall. Most of us would say that it is understandable and even just. In instances where someone has behaved unjustly to another, most of us would even continue the notion that they got what they deserved or that karma did its job. This is not the difficult part. The difficult part is when our motives are good, but we suffer anyway. We lose someone we love. Our bodies fail us and we become unhealthy even with good care. Our affection for someone else is lost or unreturned. There is a spectrum here, but there is also a common thread. Things are not going our way. We can pray to a God to change things, but sometimes the outcome is not changed. And I believe this is largely a matter of perspective. Our will, our desire, is no longer aligned with the reality of our surroundings. I don't have the answer as to why a good person falls ill to disease, as to why an innocent fetus is lost to a miscarriage, why a small child is a victim of war. From my perspective, it seems truly unfair and unjust. I see 3 options. 1, continue on with things as we see them, shaking our fist to the sky and cursing God. 2, admit the injustice of it all and shuffle off this mortal coil. 3, accept things as they are. Acceptance of what we cannot control, it seems, is the best path to living in the face of loss. This very question, for me, is the essence of religion, the core of spirituality, a dialogue with God about why these things happen. I did not expect my answers, written only a few years ago, prior to my meeting Rosanna, would become so prophetic. Upon re-examining them now, I am comfortable with keeping them intact, yet I recognize that I now need to continue with spiritual growth, whatever that may be, from where I am now. How are we doing on time here, Tim? 5?
No. You're good. I'd like you to keep talking.
Keep talking? Okay. If anybody has to go. All right.
I am humbled by your eloquence.
Okay.
No, I'm not joking.
All right. So a notion was recently offered to me. It's something I'd like to share with all of you. And it's the idea that it is possible for something to be untrue and still be beneficial for you to believe. The idea seems contrary to both science and religion at first glance, but consider the example, all guns are loaded. It is not true that all guns are loaded, but if you act as if they are, you are in fact safer. If the idea of God is still a struggle for you to accept, could you find the willingness, the self-honesty, and the open-mindedness to admit that you are better off if you act as if God does exist, even if you don't believe? Many years ago, another friend related an idea that the morality found in religion, or in religions actually, plural, are in fact meant to be signposts, guidance, warnings. And if I reflect upon that, I find some credence. We find morals taught through fables. Fables are not stories that are claimed to be revealed by God. They are accepted as stories with the kernel of wisdom contained within. In a broader view of the faiths and the world, I can see them as having their own signposts, guidance and warnings about how to behave. Beliefs that may have utility in improving our circumstances, or at least our ability to endure the hardships and tragedy we encounter on our path through life. Perhaps much of this wisdom is passed along based human observations that things tend to run a lot smoother if we don't murder, if we don't steal, if we don't covet thy neighbor's stuff, if we honor our parents. It isn't bad advice, even if it really isn't truly delivered by a God through revelation. As I watched cancer progress and eventually claim Rosanna's life, I watched her faith fail to heal her. Yet I also watched it, and I watched her use it as a tool to endure, to maintain an attitude that I don't think I would have been able to maintain. Of course there were struggles, of course there was sadness, yet she would still smile, she would still embrace me, she still loved me. In spite of no divine intervention to save her, her faith clearly and obviously helped her endure this bastard of an illness. In that respect, it unquestionably held value. Being a witness to her death, I have had to reflect on what happens to us after we depart here. The fact of the matter, as notable atheist Christopher Hitchens said once when he was asked, "How are you doing?" during an interview after he had been diagnosed with cancer himself, he replied, "Well, I am dying, but so are all of you." There will come a day when our shoulder is tapped and we are told that the party's going to continue, but you have to leave now. And the possibilities are several. We could go to an eternal life of bliss or agony. We could be reincarnated. We could cease to exist. It could be much like it was before we were born, and we will find that out soon enough. If life should turn out to be only a brief spark between two ends of an eternal darkness, it is still a miraculous event, and we ought use our precious time here wisely. A Christian acquaintance of mine, I think, put it very well when he asked me the hypothetical question: if you could be present at the crucifixion of Jesus, who would you want to be? Someone with compassion or someone cheering on the death of God? I think the answer is obvious. I want to be compassionate. I want Rosanna to be one of God's martyrs. Yet I also shudder to confess the atrocities that I would commit if I could somehow undo what has happened this year. There are some things we can control and other things we cannot. This is resolved with the Serenity Prayer. Sobriety is a gift from something greater than ourselves. I hope in my words tonight, where I tried to share my experience and my own strength in overcoming some difficulties in sobriety, that you also hear my hope as I try to continue forward with the faith that there is God, that there is purpose and meaning to creation, but that isn't always easy. And I'll end with the final paragraph of Spinoza's Ethics. If the way I was shown to lead to these things now seems very hard, still it can be found. And of course, what is found so rarely must be hard. For if salvation were at hand and could be found without great effort, How could nearly everyone neglect it? But all things excellent are as difficult as they are rare. My name is Anthony, and I'm chemically dependent. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Print that. No, you should. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you so much, Anthony, for opening yourself up. I'd like to thank Anthony for sharing his story with us tonight. You're all welcome to remain after the meeting to thank the speaker and to visit with each other. If you are interested in becoming a pledging member and keeping 2218, helping other people, please talk to me at the end of this meeting. Please help me close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Peace, everybody. Happy New Year.